What I want to wrestle with is this. Why does Jesus say forgive as you've forgiven others? Why does he add that? Because it seems to suggest in this prayer that God's forgiveness of us is predicated on our forgiving others. If we forgive others, God will forgive us. If we don't forgive others, it looks like he's saying we won't be forgiven. Matthew chapter 7, one of my favorite verses. Jesus says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Looks like Jesus is saying there that if we refuse to judge others, God will not judge us. But if we judge others, God's going to judge us. That's what the teaching says, isn't it? And doesn't that look like we're earning the right not to be judged by refusing to judge others? But wait a minute. Aren't we saved by grace alone? Don't we get off the hook on being judged because we put our faith in Jesus? So how does this teaching reconcile with that? Let me start by asking this question. Do you know what quid pro quo means? Quid pro quo. I use that phrase sometimes in my messages, and I always get people saying, what's that word mean? Were you speaking in tongues there for a second or what? Okay, quid pro quo. It's Latin. It's Latin, and it literally means something for something, as in a favor for a favor. You scratch my back, I'll scratch your back. You hit me, I'm going to hit you back. Quid pro quo. And it looks like Jesus is here giving a quid pro quo teaching. If you forgive, quid pro quo, God will forgive you. If you don't forgive, quid pro quo, God's not going to forgive you. If you judge others, quid pro quo, God will judge you. And if you don't judge others, quid pro quo, God won't judge you. And that makes salvation look like a quid pro quo arrangement. Now, the reason it looks this way is because we tend to take to the biblical text a quid pro quo mentality. We tend to understand the New Testament, and really the whole Bible, in legal terms. And it's not our fault. Because from very early on in the Western church, not so much in the Eastern church, they're not strapped with this, but in the Western church, some of the earliest theologians were lawyers. Tertullian in the 2nd century was a lawyer. Then he converts to Christianity. And the Reformation, you got legal stuff going all over the place. Calvin was a lawyer who converted to Christianity. So they bring a lawyer's mind to the text. And they see everything in terms of quid pro quo. And so salvation becomes sort of a legal deal. Now, the analogy of prosecuting judge and guilty defendants and Jesus as the advocate is not totally wrong. There is a legal dimension in the Bible. But as a paradigm, to understand the Bible as a whole, I want to submit to you that that is entirely wrong. It's the wrong way to interpret these passages. The New Testament does not see salvation in legal terms. It doesn't see forgiveness in legal terms. In fact, if you see forgiveness in legal quid pro quo terms, you don't have forgiveness anymore. No one really forgives. They just get paid off by somebody else. The New Testament doesn't see forgiveness in legal terms. It doesn't see freedom from judgment in legal terms. It doesn't think in quid pro quo terms. The Bible sees things in terms of a relationship, a covenantal relationship. So when you read the New Testament, don't think court of law. Think marriage relationship. Because the truth is that God doesn't want to be seen as your prosecuting attorney. He wants to be seen as your heavenly lover, your heavenly spouse. And Jesus didn't come into this world to work out a quid pro quo arrangement to placate God's wrath. He came to express God's love to free us from the devil's wrath. The kingdom is about learning how to live in a marriage relationship with God, learning how to receive and express a fullness of life. It's about learning how to dance with God and to live in the beautiful, radical kingdom. It's about learning how to experience and to express abundant life. And if you do that, the eternal stuff's going to take care of itself. The thrust is on here and now, receiving this life, dancing with God. Jesus' teachings aren't given as quid pro quo legal stipulations. Like, here's the contract you have with your probation officer. That's not the flavor of Jesus' teachings. They're given to describe for us what covenantal life with the living God looks like. And at the center of all of that is about freely receiving God's life and freely giving God's life. Jesus says, freely you have received, Matthew chapter 10. Freely you received, freely give. That's the essence of this dance. And so what Jesus is teaching us in a million different ways, it's about receiving God's fullness of life and expressing God's fullness of life. Now listen to this. Receiving God's forgiveness and expressing God's forgiveness. Receiving unconditional love and expressing unconditional love. Receiving freedom from judgment and expressing freedom from judgment. But it's not a quid pro quo contract. It's about a free covenant that ushers us into kingdom living. It's like a kingdom cycle where we receive and we express, and it's all, the whole thing, the receiving and the expressing, is what it means to dance with God. It's what the kingdom life is all about. You can think about it this way. This is the reality of the kingdom. It's sort of a cyclical flow. God pours his perfect life into us, and we receive it freely. And as we receive it, we express it. And the more we receive it, the more we express it, but also the more we express it, the more we receive it. We're becoming kingdomized. We're getting involved in the kingdom flow. It's a holistic thing. It's a cycle that we're a part of. And you can't even theoretically separate the receiving from the expressing, or the expressing from the receiving. The quid pro quo legal mindset wants to separate things. Well, technically, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? But see, in the kingdom, there's no chicken and there's no egg. It's just one thing. What it means for God, think about it like this. What it means for God to reign in your life is for him to reign over all your life, and that includes all your relationships. So, of course, your receiving kingdom life is inseparable from your expressing it, and your expressing kingdom life is inseparable from your receiving it. This is what it looks like to freely receive and freely give. They're inseparably wrapped up with one another. When we refuse to express to others what we freely received, it blocks our capacity to receive it. That's just a metaphysical truth. That's just the nature of the world that God has set up. It is impossible for you to experience and celebrate the free forgiveness of God to the extent that you yourself refuse to forgive. It just blocks it. It's impossible for you to experience fully the freedom from judgment to the extent that you are still living in judgment. It's impossible for you to express, to receive, and enter into right relatedness with God and not to be rightly related with others. To the extent that you're not rightly related with others, it affects your right relatedness with God. Why? Because the kingdom isn't just about you, as though you're separate from your relationships. It's about you, and part of that is your relationships. You see, it's all part of one holistic thing. And so to drive home the holistic nature of the kingdom, Jesus is saying that whenever you ask for forgiveness, remember your own covenant with him to forgive others. They're all wrapped up together. In fact, ask God to forgive you the way you have forgiven others. And so if you haven't forgiven others, forgive them before you ask God for forgiveness. In fact, Jesus teaches that explicitly in Matthew chapter 5 when he says, if you come to the altar to offer up a gift, which is kind of in the old covenant, your atoning gift, as you come to offer that, and then you realize you've got something against somebody, leave the gift, first go reconcile, and then come back and offer up your gift. Why? Because the kingdom isn't just about you and Jesus as though you could be separated from your relationships with others. No, it's about the whole thing. It's about the whole thing. You are, to a large degree, defined by your relationships. For you to be receiving life is for your relationships to be receiving life. If you're not willing to let that happen, it blocks your ability to receive life.